Separating the myth from the manifestation. This is Seen and Unseen. I am Edgar Reck, and today, as always, we cross the line. When people find out that I am a professional demonologist specializing in exorcism, the question I get asked the most is, what made you start studying exorcisms and demonology? Now, what it usually meant was this: what mental disorder could possibly cause a young man to study demonology, demons, the occult, and exorcism? I am not offended at the implication, but the answer is much more simple than a quote-unquote spiritual revelation or a spiritual mission or something like that. In fact, it's much more grounded and logical. It all goes back to my early boxing days. I had a boxing match with a person who was levels below me, in skill, in technique, and definitely in boxing IQ. I was relaxed before the fight. The win was basically in my pocket. Nothing to worry about. The bell rang, the match started, and Edgar Reck, the future demonologist and exorcist, was taken back to school. I lost every single round by points. I could not understand why I couldn't land the combinations and punches that I wanted. With all due respect, my opponent's defensive skills were not that good, and he moved no better than me. Worse, in fact. Yet, he landed more clean punches than I did. I was outmaneuvered, outskilled, and outboxed. And the funny thing is, every boxer in the ring knows if he's losing the fight. Same happened to me. I knew I was losing, and even though, without much arrogance, I was definitely better, I was losing the fight. And I did. The level of shame and embarrassment I felt was like nothing I had experienced before. Basically, that was my first reality check about what boxing IQ was really about. Little did I know, that fight and the lesson that came with it would set the stage for the rest of my life, personal, academic, and professional. That was the breaking point. I went back home and thought to myself, I was definitely better in terms of skill. I know I trained hard. It wasn't that I wasn't prepared for the fight. I just couldn't figure out what could have been the reason. The next day, back in the gym, I spoke to my coach and he gave me the best lesson I have ever received in my life. Literally. He told me, "He simply read you like an open book, Edgar. It's not the skill that wins the fights. It's how well you know your opponent. You can be the best boxer in the world, but if your opponent is going to crack your game, read you, and figure out your mistakes and weaknesses, you're done." Then, I will never forget it, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "You must know your opponent." That short speech was the beginning of it all. The beginning of what would define my mentality, my spirituality, and my life itself for years to come. Of course, I can go on for days without end, preaching about how much boxing can teach you about yourself and life in general, but this lesson was the most powerful one yet. To beat your enemy, you must know your enemy. You may have the most amazing skills, technique, speed, power, which obviously give you an advantage, but it's not the ultimate key to beating your opponent. Learning how to read him, noticing his patterns, his mistakes, his way of movement, or even his way of thinking, that is the strongest factor in winning. As crazy as it may sound, in boxing, muscles do not win fights. Brains do. Or, to be more specific, reading, understanding, and knowing the opponent in front of you. You cannot beat who you do not know. Now, as fun as it is to talk about boxing, I must continue the story of how I applied this to my eagerness to study demonology and exorcism. At first, I was simply a theology student who later started specializing in exorcisms. And the lesson I just shared with you, dear friends, was the deciding factor in where my theological career would go. I wanted to know my enemy. I wanted to know those who oppress, torment, possess, and mentally abuse people worldwide each and every single day. In other words, my boxing mentality made the choice for me. If I was to win in everyday spiritual warfare, I had to know exactly who I was up against. In Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, we read exactly who we are up against. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Who are those principalities? Who are those powers of darkness? If we do not know them, how will we recognize them? Certainly not by the horns and a red tail. That's Hollywood stuff. In reality, people even mistake them for divine revelations or angels. In spiritual warfare, which exorcism is, of course, a part of, the enemy is not flesh and blood. It's spiritual entities, some of which possess, some haunt and torment, and others rule over the nations of the world. So now, if I was to step into the studies and career of demonology and exorcism, it was not enough for me to simply know that in the name of Jesus, demonic spirits come out. It was not enough to know that reading the Bible and praying is how you keep evil spirits away from your life. In fact, as I later learned, that is a dangerous oversimplification, because the truth is, the more you try to live a holy and righteous life, the more you put a massive red target on your back for demons to try to affect and influence you. If only I had $1 for every single time I heard Christians say something along the lines of, "We do not need to study about demons," or "All we need to do is learn about God," or "Studying demonology is dangerous and we should not be involved in it." I have lost the count of how many times I heard Christians say that all we need to do is pray and go to church for demons to depart from our lives. If that is true, then why have I personally met demonically possessed people sitting inside a church during Sunday Mass? True story, dear friends. Once, I was told about a demonically possessed person who goes to church every single Sunday. He would be sitting there like everyone else, looking completely normal. It was only a month later that it was revealed this person needed an actual, serious exorcism. That's when I got the call, and that's when I met him in person. So, no, dear Christians, simply going to church does not keep a demon away. Even though that's what evil spirits would like you to think, to continue walking into church blindfolded and sitting in the pews with absolute ignorance. Demons are not against that. Let me put it this way. Praying, going to church, reading the Bible, it's like having amazing skills and technique in boxing. It's like having speed, power, and a physical advantage. You are definitely prepared for the fight, but it is not the only deciding factor in you winning, especially when it comes to winning those everyday spiritual battles, both tiny and big. And that's when we arrive at what we have been talking about this whole time. Know your enemy. Dear friends, when it comes to demons, evil spirits, principalities and powers, it is far from being a simple matter. As I always like to say, demons and Satan are the best theologians on earth. They know exactly how to manipulate the scriptures. Also, they are masters of psychology. They are fully aware of how to affect you emotionally, how to exploit your psychological blind spots, and how to lead you down the road of depression, mental weakness, desperation, and fear. They hide, they scheme, and their plans in our daily lives are far from being obvious. Knowing your enemy, his agenda, his way of manipulating and affecting people, and the deep, dark places in which he hides, hoping to never be seen, that is what I call knowing your enemy in exorcisms and spiritual warfare. Yes, we rely on God completely. He is the one who brings spiritual victory. Without God, our skills, our prayers, and our knowledge make no sense. They are pointless. It is not us who win, it's God. But, dear friends, do not be mistaken. God also teaches us not to be naive. God teaches us to be wise and not to be foolish. Warnings and mentions in the Bible about foolishness appear 5 times more than warnings and mentions about drunkenness, for example. That should tell you something. In other words, I cannot drop my hands in the ring, allow my opponent to hit me, and then say, God, why didn't you save me? So, as in boxing, so in spiritual warfare, knowing who your enemy is, how he acts, and what he plans is the wisdom that prevents you from being hit with a hard spiritual punch, keeps you from being knocked out, and prevents you from feeling the pain of your own mistakes. My dear friends, do not fear studying and learning about your spiritual enemy. That is exactly what he doesn't want you to do, withholding you with fear and doubts. In fact, that is one of the main reasons for this podcast and for the existence of my community. To know your enemy and to leave our daily spiritual ring victorious. And now, as always, my dear friends, if you are serious about understanding the actual mechanics of exorcism, spiritual warfare, the reality of the demonic, and the true boundaries of the paranormal, the door to my seen and unseen community is open. Inside, you can examine real field case studies from my 15 years of research, access step-by-step video modules, and get direct answers from me during our weekly live Q&As. The link, as always, is right down in the description below. In our next episode, we are going to talk about one of the most important, heavily discussed, and one of the most controversial topics. Who can perform an exorcism? I am going to address the myths surrounding this topic, as well as answer the most common question of who can actually do it. I hope you have enjoyed this episode, and as for now, we have crossed the line. Keep your eyes open. This was Seen and Unseen, and I will see you in the next episode.